Imagine, if you will, walking into this incredibly high-end, exclusive luxury boutique in London.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. So the lighting is super moody, the music is pulsing, and you see this hoodie on a rack. It's stark black, and it's covered head to toe in dense white Cyrillic text, crosses, and like angelic imagery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you check the price tag, and it's over $1,000.
Over 1,000 just for a hoodie.
Over $1,000. And then someone taps you on the shoulder and tells you that the design you're looking at is actually an exact replica of garments worn by ascetic monks.
Oh, man.
I mean, men who have literally taken lifelong vows of extreme poverty, silence, and just absolute withdrawal from the material world. And it really makes you wonder, why does our culture do things like this?
Right.
Why are we so obsessed with the outward appearance of depth while we're actively running away from the actual demands of it?
It is a totally jarring juxtaposition, isn't it? I mean, you have the ultimate symbol of material renunciation being sold as the ultimate symbol of material excess.
It's like a glitch in the matrix.
Exactly. It feels like a glitch in our cultural matrix. We look at something like that luxury hoodie or, on a much grander scale, a multi-million-dollar architectural marvel.
Right.
And we are told by society that because it's arresting to the eye, because it commands our attention, it must therefore be the pinnacle of creation.
We've just been trained to equate intense visual impact with actual meaningful substance.
We really have. We treat it like a math problem. Like, if a design has the right proportions, the relevant cultural edge, and the perfect lighting, it just equals a masterpiece.
But then you encounter these strange, murky contradictions.
Yeah, constantly.
Like buildings that cost absolute fortunes but feel just utterly soulless. Or fashion that looks incredible on a runway but leaves you feeling completely empty when you actually wear it.
Which really points to a profound crisis in how we interact with the physical world. I mean, we are constantly surrounding ourselves with objects and environments that are flawlessly designed, yet they completely fail to offer us any genuine contentment.
And that is the absolute core of what we are unpacking today. So welcome to this deep dive.
It's great to be here.
For you listening right now, whether you are battling traffic on your commute or going for a long run or maybe just sitting at home trying to make sense of the modern world, our mission today is to completely deconstruct the way you look at the things you desire.
It's going to be a fun one.
We are diving into a really dense, challenging, and frankly fascinating philosophical essay today. It's titled Aesthetics versus Beauty.
And it's important to note, this isn't just a standard art critique.
Not at all.
It really challenges everything we think we know about what makes something visually appealing versus what makes something fundamentally truly beautiful.
So the author of this essay has provided a really brilliant framework, and it's backed up by some very specific visual exhibits.
Yeah, to understand this philosophical divide, we're going to be analyzing everything from the interpersonal dynamics of human attraction.
Which is wild.
It is. To the commercial output of luxury fashion brands, all the way up to the architecture of massive state-sponsored cathedrals.
A really broad scope.
It is, but it's all in service of diagnosing a very specific spiritual and cultural blind spot.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yes.
Because the central paradox we are exploring is going to resonate with anyone who has ever felt disappointed by something that was supposed to be amazing.
Right, we've all been there.
Why can an awe-inspiring cathedral, built with the finest materials known to man, or a piece of insanely expensive high fashion, be aesthetically stunning, like completely arresting to the eye, but simultaneously be entirely devoid of true beauty?
So to really visualize the scale of that paradox, let's set the stage a bit. If you were looking at my backdrop right now, you'd see a split screen that kind of captures the two extremes of today's analysis.
Okay, paint a picture for us.
On one side, there's this imposing monumental facade of a modern cathedral, and it's forged in dark metals, glass, and this khaki stone.
Super heavy looking.
Very heavy. And on the other side, a high-fashion runway model draped in that luxury streetwear covered in religious iconography that you mentioned earlier.
So two completely different worlds.
Exactly. One seemingly holy, one entirely secular. Two completely different intentions, yet, according to the author of our source material, they both fall into the exact same philosophical trap.
It's a wild comparison, but I am really eager to see how the author connects those dots. I mean, the essay comes right out of the gate with a major swing, claiming that aesthetics and beauty are not synonyms.
Right, they're not the same thing.
No, I have to admit, I am completely guilty of using those words interchangeably.
Oh, I think most people are.
Like if I see a great painting or a beautifully designed car, I'll say, wow, that's beautiful, or I really love the aesthetic.
Sure.
But the author is arguing that our modern kind of sloppy misuse of these words is actually hiding a massive gap in how we understand reality.
That distinction is the absolute bedrock of the entire essay. We really have to separate the two terms completely to get this. Let's start with how the author defines aesthetics.
Okay.
In this framework, aesthetics are the underlying principles that render a physical object appealing. But the key word here is subjective.
Subjective.
Yeah. Aesthetics are entirely dictated by context, by the surrounding culture, and by structural composition.
So it's basically the rules of the game for a specific time and place.
Exactly that. Just think about how those rules change over time. Like, what was aesthetically pleasing in a 1920s flapper dress is vastly different from the grunge aesthetic of the 1990s.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Which is different again from the ultra-minimalist aesthetic we see today. So aesthetics are the language of visual appeal, but that language is constantly shifting based on who is speaking and who is listening.
I see. So aesthetics are essentially the mechanics.
Right.
It's the color palette, the symmetry, the cultural references that basically signal to our brains, hey, you are supposed to like the way this looks based on what society currently values.
That is a really great way to put it. But beauty, according to the author, operates on an entirely different plane.
Okay, how so?
Beauty is not subjective. It's transcendent. It's innate. It is universally recognized.
So it doesn't change from the 1920s to the 90s.
Exactly. While aesthetics might make you, nod your head in appreciation of a clever design, true beauty is that which renders the observer into a state of absolute awe.
Oh, wow. So it doesn't rely on you knowing the cultural context. You don't need to read a plaque on the wall to understand that a mountain range at sunset is beautiful. It just hits you.
It stops you in your tracks. And the author actually leans on a very famous, very heavy quote from Fyodor Dostoevsky's novel The Idiot to elevate this concept.
Oh, what's the quote?
Dostoevsky wrote, "Beauty will save the world."
That is a massive statement. I mean, he didn't write aesthetics will save the world or good design will save the world.
No, he didn't. And the author takes Dostoevsky's premise very seriously. If beauty has the power to save, it means it possesses a quality of the divine.
Right.
The author argues that God is the origin point of all things that are genuinely beautiful. Therefore, when you encounter true beauty, you aren't just looking at good proportions. You are, at the very least, coming into contact with something that shares in the transcendent nature of the divine.
Which completely raises the stakes here. This isn't just an architectural review or an art critique anymore.
No, not at all.
This is about our spiritual orientation. The author states that it is actually a core responsibility, and they specifically cite the Christian perspective here. But I think it applies broadly to anyone seeking meaning to immerse oneself in beauty.
Yes.
We have a duty to seek it out and create it, because doing so is how we orient ourselves toward the divine.
Which brings us to the core warning of the text. What's fascinating here is that the author is deeply concerned that modern society's pursuit and veneration of aesthetics without beauty is a super dangerous detour.
A detour.
Right. Yeah. If we get distracted by the subjective mechanics of appeal, if we settle for just making things look cool or relevant, we fail in that higher responsibility. We're settling for the temporary and the subjective when we are actually meant to be striving for the eternal and the universal.
Let me see if I can ground this a bit, because we are dealing with some very high-level philosophical concepts right out of the gate.
Sure.
Tell me if this analogy tracks with the author's argument. Think about a symphony.
Okay.
Are aesthetics basically the sheet music, like the notes on the page, the time signature, the mathematical rules of harmony?
Oh, I like where this is going.
You can have a piece of sheet music that is perfectly composed, aesthetically flawless in its structure.
Yeah.
But beauty? Well, beauty is the actual emotional resonance, the goosebumps you get when you hear that symphony played live by a passionate orchestra.
That is a phenomenal way to illustrate it.
Yeah.
The sheet music, the aesthetics, is the language used to describe the composition. And as the author notes, the language of aesthetics can help explain why something might be beautiful. Yeah. You can look at the sheet music and point to a crescendo to explain that sudden rush of emotion. But holding the sheet music in your hands does not guarantee you will experience the beauty of the music.
Right. Just staring at a piece of paper isn't going to save the world.
Exactly. Furthermore, aesthetics and beauty are not enemies. They often work together beautifully. I mean, the orchestra needs the sheet music, right?
Yeah, of course.
But if you only have the sheet music and no musicians, if you have the structure but no soul, you have aesthetics without beauty. You have the illusion of the thing without the substance.
I love that, the illusion without the substance. Now, grasping this abstract difference between the transcendent and the subjective can feel a bit like, I don't know, sitting in a dense university lecture.
You can, yeah.
The author seems to recognize this because the essay immediately pivots to apply this framework to something intensely relatable, deeply biological, and honestly, a little provocative.
Yes, the author moves straight from theological theory into the realm of physical human attraction.
Which is a bold move.
It's a very bold move, but it is incredibly effective for making the philosophy concrete.
So let's explore this analogy.
Mhm.
The author claims that most men, if they are being completely honest with themselves, can discern the difference between a woman who is genuinely beautiful versus a woman who is merely sexually attractive.
Or what the author colloquially refers to as hot.
Right.
It is a really striking comparison. The author is aligning the concept of attractiveness with aesthetics, and they're reserving the word beauty for its transcendent meaning.
Okay.
Let's look at the specific characteristics the text assigns to mere attractiveness. The author describes attractiveness as explicit. It is finite. It is quantitative. And most crucially, it is transient.
Transient meaning fleeting. Like
Ugh.
it just doesn't last. The author acknowledges that, yes, in the immediate moment, someone who is highly attractive,
Right.
someone who possesses all those explicit aesthetic markers, might spark immediate infatuation.
Sure.
It's a really loud biological signal.
But that signal is hollow. Because attractiveness is explicit and quantitative, the author argues that there are actually no natural limits placed on our desire for it.
What do you mean by no natural limits?
It creates a bottomless hunger. Attractiveness might spark desire, but it is fundamentally incapable of offering contentment. It traps the observer in an endless loop, just this desperate hunger for novelty.
The text has a line that really hit me. The author says that attractiveness actually loses its appeal as one becomes more familiar with it.
That is a devastating observation, but it perfectly explains the psychological treadmill of novelty.
Yeah.
If a relationship is based purely on the aesthetics of physical attractiveness, the moment familiarity sets in, the aesthetic spell is basically broken.
Wow.
The novelty wears off, and the observer is forced to seek out a new aesthetic thrill to replace it.
That is wow.
Yeah.
And the author contrasts this directly with true beauty. In this relational context, beauty is described as reserved, it's authentic, it is something that is felt just as much as it is seen.
Exactly.
And most importantly, beauty is defined not by endless gnawing desire, but by profound contentment.
The word contentment is carrying a lot of philosophical weight here. The author even includes a footnote mentioning they debated using the words satisfaction and fulfillment alongside contentment.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and to really grasp why this matters, we need to introduce a core concept from the source material, which is the idea of telos.
Telos, that's Aristotelian, right? Meaning like the ultimate purpose or the end goal of a thing.
Exactly. Every living thing, every desire has a telos. The telos of an acorn is to become an oak tree.
Right. Here.
The author is arguing that human beings have a deep biological and spiritual telos, a longing for authentic, lasting beauty and connection. But we constantly conflate that deep longing with the shallow pursuit of mere attractiveness.
It's like we are dying of thirst, but we keep chugging salt water.
That's a great analogy.
The salt water looks like what we need. It briefly wets the mouth, but it actually just accelerates the dehydration.
Exactly.
And the author doesn't just leave this as a theory. They put some pretty heavy-hitting examples, both historical and modern, to prove how disastrous this confusion between attractiveness and beauty can be.
They do. To illustrate the modern failure of this pursuit, the author points to Darush Valizada.
Better known online as Rushvi.
Right. For years, he was one of the most prominent figures in the online pickup artist community.
Right, a culture entirely dedicated to the endless quantitative pursuit of sexual attractiveness and conquest.
Exactly. Yet even after supposedly mastering that aesthetic game, he ultimately renounced it all. He seemingly realized that the endless accumulation of attractiveness just yielded absolute spiritual emptiness.
The ultimate proof that the salt water doesn't hydrate you.
Yeah.
And then the author goes way back into history, bringing up the Ottoman imperial harem. I thought this was such a fascinating inclusion.
It is a brilliant historical proof of concept. I mean, the Ottoman imperial harem was essentially the ultimate concentration of physical attractiveness.
Right.
You had hundreds of the most aesthetically appealing women from across an empire gathered into one enclosed palace. If multiplying attractiveness equates to multiplying happiness, the harem should have been a utopian paradise of contentment.
But it wasn't, was it?
Far from it. As the author points out, it did not result in bliss for the court. Historically, it was a hotbed of intense conflict, vicious paranoia, and honestly, deadly power struggles.
Wow.
It proves the author's point perfectly. Multiplying the quantitative aesthetic of attractiveness does not yield the transcendent quality of beauty or peace. More often than not, it yields chaos.
Because more is not better when the thing you are accumulating is inherently hollow.
Exactly.
But the ultimate example the author uses for this failure is King Solomon. Now, this one requires some unpacking. The essay states that Solomon demonstrates that wisdom without something called noetic temperament is folly and ultimately self-destructive.
Right.
What is the author getting at here? Like, what is noetic temperament?
So, to understand that, we have to look at the theology behind the term. In many ancient Christian and philosophical traditions, the noetic faculty is considered the absolute highest part of the human soul.
Okay.
It is sometimes described as the spiritual intellect or the eye of the heart. It's the part of us that is capable of directly apprehending divine truth and beauty.
Okay, so it's basically the internal radar for the divine.
Precisely. Now, look at King Solomon. He is legendary for possessing unparalleled practical wisdom and unimaginable wealth.
He had everything.
He had access to literally every aesthetic pleasure on earth, every earthly attractiveness, famously including hundreds of wives and concubines. But the author suggests that despite his worldly wisdom, Solomon lacked the noetic temperament, the spiritual discipline required to orient his massive desires toward divine beauty.
So he had the smartest brain, but a completely blind eye of the heart.
Yes. Without that noetic anchor, his pursuit of earthly aesthetics and endless attractiveness became his undoing. It led to his ultimate downfall, the fracturing of his kingdom and his alienation from his spiritual telos.
Wow.
Wisdom and resources, without a noetic orientation toward beauty, just allow you to destroy yourself more efficiently.
That is a very sobering thought.
Yeah.
The smartest man in the world destroyed himself because he chased the aesthetic instead of the beautiful.
Yeah.
And the author makes an incredible pivot here, taking this very personal, relational hunger and scaling it up to explain modern consumerism. The essay explicitly states that this exact same dynamic is why we are so thrilled by new purchases, but almost immediately dissatisfied by them.
It is the exact same psychological and spiritual mechanism at play. Just think about the modern consumer experience.
Right.
When you buy a new luxury item, let's say the latest smartphone or really high-end jacket, you are being seduced by its aesthetics. The sleek packaging, the industrial design, the immediate hit of novelty. It is the consumer equivalent of romantic infatuation.
Oh, the unboxing video is basically a tribute to the aesthetic.
Absolutely. It totally is. But because that object is merely an aesthetic thing, completely devoid of any transcendent divine beauty, the appeal begins to fade the very second you become familiar with it.
Right.
The shiny new phone just becomes the device you check emails on. The luxury jacket just becomes the thing keeping you warm. The aesthetic thrill evaporates, and you're left hollow, forced to seek out the next hit of novelty.
The endless treadmill of desire.
Yeah. The only way off the treadmill, as the author states, is to realize why those desires exist in the first place. That deep-seated hunger isn't supposed to be satisfied by a new phone.
Right.
The hunger exists to pull you toward God, toward true transcendent beauty. But we keep trying to feed a spiritual hunger with aesthetic snacks.
Okay, I have to push back a little here. I want to play devil's advocate for a moment because it feels like we are walking a very fine line.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Isn't attractiveness or aesthetic appeal basically the biological foot in the door? Like you see a brightly colored piece of fruit, it looks aesthetically pleasing, so you eat it and get nutrients.
Right.
You see a physically attractive person, that aesthetic appeal initiates a conversation, which might eventually lead to a deeply beautiful, spiritually grounded, lifelong marriage.
Absolutely.
Is the author saying that aesthetics and attractiveness are inherently bad? Are they evil? Because condemning the physical world entirely feels like a very dark path to go down.
That is a vital question, and it's one the author clearly anticipates. The essay explicitly clarifies this stance. Aesthetics are not evil. They are not the enemy of beauty.
Okay.
The author writes, I do not claim that things which are aesthetic without beauty are evil. They might be misguided, they might be shallow, but the author hesitates to even label them as sinful in a vacuum.
I think they bring up the literal translation of the word sin, right? A missing of the mark.
Yes, and a fascinating footnote, actually. The author contemplates that if our ultimate telos is to be fulfilled by true beauty, then constantly settling for non-beautiful aesthetic things represents a literal missing of the mark.
Right.
But even with that definition, the author refuses to condemn these pursuits outright. The author is content to hold the tension.
So what is the actual danger if the things themselves aren't evil?
The danger is not that aesthetics exist. The danger is that we stop at the aesthetic layer and convince ourselves we have arrived at the final destination. The danger is idolatry. It is worshiping the shiny signpost instead of traveling to the destination the signpost is pointing toward.
Worshipping the signpost. I really like that. It's not that the sign is evil. It's just really stupid to set up camp at the sign and think you've seen the Grand Canyon. And this hunger for the signpost, this constant need for the next aesthetic hit, leads us directly into the author's next major critique. Because what happens when that endless consumer hunger, that secular treadmill, looks at the deep, ancient aesthetics of religion itself and decides to turn that into a product?
That is where the essay shifts from personal morality to cultural critique. And it is a breathtaking transition. The author turns their attention to how the sacred is commodified in the modern world.
The author starts by critiquing a phenomenon they call online orthodoxy.
Yes.
They observe that within the Eastern Orthodox Christian community, particularly on the internet, there has been this massive surge in the promotion of Orthodox aesthetics.
Right, the visual appeal.
We are talking about trendy clothing brands, military-style patches with religious slogans, highly stylized devotional items. But the author notes that a lot of this comes off as entirely performative.
Yeah.
Instead of a lived, grueling faith, orthodoxy is being treated as just another brand to be consumed and displayed for clout.
It is the exact same trap of the consumer treadmill, but draped in religious imagery. People are naturally drawn to the rugged, ancient, visually striking aesthetic of Eastern Orthodoxy.
I mean, it does look cool.
It has a visual gravitas. It looks very cool. But the author cuts through all of that with what I think is the most devastating quote in the entire essay.
Let's hear it.
Aesthetics do not save souls, whereas beauty does.
Aesthetics do not save souls. That line just rings in your ears.
It really does.
You can buy all the right tactical patches. You can wear the heavily branded shirts. You can fill your social media with the coolest ancient icons. But if it is merely an aesthetic performance, it completely lacks the transcendent beauty that actually changes a human heart.
Exactly.
Now, to be fair, the author admits to owning some Orthodox clothing themselves, so they aren't coming from a place of pure hypocrisy. They recognize that a wardrobe choice is mostly innocuous.
But they recognize the slippery slope. A t-shirt won't save you, but treating your faith as an aesthetic brand opens a very dangerous door. The real danger, the author argues, is that when believers themselves reduce their faith to a pursuit of aesthetics, the secular market will happily step in, usurp those sacred images, hollow them out completely, and sell them back to the masses at a premium.
And we have the ultimate jaw-dropping example of this from the source material. This is where we return to that opening hook, because the author points to a real-world, London-based fashion firm called Kokontazi, or KTZ.
Yeah.
The essay provides visual evidence of their Fall 21 capsule collection, and it is almost unbelievable. I need you to describe this for the listener because the contrast is just mind-bending.
So the author provides images directly from the KTZ web store. What you are looking at is a line of luxury streetwear that is heavily, unmistakably appropriated from the robes of the Great Schema.
And what exactly is the Great Schema, for those who don't know?
The Great Schema is the absolute highest degree of monasticism in the Eastern Orthodox Church. It is reserved for monks who have reached a level of spiritual excellence that requires them to take the strictest possible vows. We are talking about a life of extreme asceticism, unceasing prayer, profound silence, and absolute poverty. Their garments are deeply symbolic, covered in the instruments of Christ's passion and specific prayers.
And this London fashion firm decided that was a great look for a runway.
Unbelievably, yes.
The first item the author highlights is called the KTZ Church Print Embroidered Side Zip Hoodie. It is a black hoodie covered head to toe in stark white embroidery. It features crosses, angelic imagery, cherubim, and dense Cyrillic text that perfectly mimics the sacred prayers written on a monk's schema.
It's just wild.
From the price tag, the author notes it retails for 1,010 Canadian dollars, over $1,000 for a hoodie mimicking a vow of extreme poverty.
The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. And it's not just one item.
No.
The collection includes a long zip kaftan, a bomber jacket, and a sweatshirt. Every single piece follows this exact same design language. Black luxury garments, suffocated in white religious iconography, being modeled by young men with blank, high-fashion stares.
It is the absolute pinnacle of hollow aesthetics. The author does not hold back here. They call these items unquestionably blasphemous and state that they make a complete mockery of orthodoxy and the monastic life in particular.
Let's analyze the stark contrast the author presents to drive this home. The author writes, "The pursuit of aesthetics will have one wear counterfeit monastic robes, but the pursuit of beauty will have one enter the monastic life."
Oh, wow. The pursuit of aesthetics will have one wear counterfeit monastic robes, but the pursuit of beauty will have one enter the monastic life.
That is incredible.
It perfectly distills the argument.
That is the fundamental difference between wanting to look like you have spiritual depth and actually doing the silent, grueling, unglamorous, lifelong work of having spiritual depth.
Precisely. I mean, that is the crux of the issue. The KTZ line is the ultimate real-world manifestation of the attractiveness versus beauty dynamic.
Right.
The fashion designer saw the visual appeal, the sheer aesthetic power of the great schema robes, the stark black and white contrast, the mysterious Cyrillic text. It is visually arresting. It looks cool.
But they violently stripped away the telos. They removed the purpose, the divine beauty, the blood, sweat, and tears of prayer that gives those robes their actual meaning. They took a symbol of ultimate self-denial and transmuted it into an object of extreme consumer vanity.
It's taking the sheet music of a sacred ancient hymn and using it as the backing track for a luxury car commercial.
Yes.
The author notes that this proves a very uncomfortable truth. Orthodoxy's aesthetics are highly appealing to the secular world, even when they are debased. People are clearly hungry for the visual weight, the historical gravity of these ancient traditions. They just have zero interest in the spiritual demands that created that gravity in the first place.
Which forces a very uncomfortable mirror onto all of us, regardless of our religious beliefs.
How so?
Well, how often do we in the modern world adopt the aesthetic markers of a lifestyle, a philosophy, or a movement without ever committing to the underlying truth of that movement?
Oh, all the time.
We want the aesthetic of being an intellectual by curating a beautiful bookshelf for our Zoom background, but we don't actually read the dense, difficult books. We want the aesthetic of fitness by buying $300 athletic wear, but we don't put in the grueling hours at the gym.
We want the $1,000 monk hoodie, but we don't want to fast and pray. It is a brutal diagnosis of modern culture.
It really is.
But I want to pivot the conversation here, because this essay takes these concepts and scales them up in a massive, unavoidable way.
Right into architecture.
Exactly. If wearing a counterfeit monastic hoodie is a failure of beauty on a personal, individual scale, what happens when a society makes that exact same mistake on a structural level? What happens when this confusion between aesthetics and beauty is constructed out of millions of tons of stone, steel, and bronze, funded by a national government?
That brings us to the architectural core of the essay, what we might call the tale of three cathedrals. The author transitions from fashion into architecture to demonstrate that this philosophical divide literally dominates the skylines of our cities.
And this part is incredibly visual, so we're going to do our best to paint these pictures for you. The author presents three massive Russian cathedrals to illustrate their point. First up, Cathedral number 1, the main cathedral of the Russian armed forces.
Based on the visual evidence provided in the source material, this is a truly astonishing structure. Built recently, the main cathedral is immediately distinct for its coloring.
It's super unique.
Very much so. It is dominated by darker, khaki, greenish, and gray tones, which is highly unusual for an Orthodox church.
Right.
It heavily utilizes dark metal and glass, giving it a somewhat industrial, almost martial appearance. The author notes its Art Deco stylings and describes its overall design language as grand, rigid, and imposing.
It looks like a fortress of faith.
Yeah.
And since it was built to commemorate military victories in the armed forces, that khaki green color makes complete logical sense.
It does.
Now, the author's view on this building is incredibly nuanced. They state that strictly as a building, it exudes strength, confidence, and self-assurance. They even admit that they find it highly appealing to their own aesthetic sensibilities. But, and this is where the hammer drops, The author definitively states that this cathedral is not beautiful.
This is the central architectural puzzle of the essay. Why is this massive, intricate building not beautiful? Before we answer that, we must address the specific controversy surrounding this cathedral that the author brings up to ensure we understand the full context.
Yes, and let me offer a strict impartiality note for you listeners here. The source material notes that there has been significant controversy over the use of Soviet symbols and emblems incorporated into the stained glass mosaics of this newly built cathedral.
Right.
We, as the hosts of this deep dive, are maintaining absolute, total neutrality regarding the political implications of these symbols and the regimes associated with them. We are not taking a stance. We are merely reporting the author's philosophical argument regarding this building.
That's important clarification. And within the essay, the author's stance is that they do not immediately take those Soviet symbols as inherently offensive in this specific context.
Yeah, why not?
The author's rationale is historical. There were innumerable Orthodox Christians and Christians of other denominations who fought and died on both sides of the Second World War.
Right.
Therefore, the author believes that honoring the war dead, regardless of what secular regime they happen to serve under at that specific time in history, is a universal Christian calling. For the author, the faith transcends politics, and in death, all Orthodox Christians are united with Christ.
So to be clear, the author isn't saying the cathedral lacks beauty because of those controversial political symbols. In fact, the author thinks the cathedral actually succeeds in its goal of appealing to both the nationalistic and spiritual sensibilities of modern Russia. But their argument is that even in succeeding at that hybrid goal, it fundamentally fails to attain true beauty.
Yeah.
Now, to prove that this isn't just a modern problem, the author introduces cathedral number 2. Enter St. Isaac's Cathedral in St. Petersburg.
Looking at the provided images, St. Isaac's is a colossal classical structure. It features a massive, dominating golden dome, rows of towering classical columns, and a pediment filled with intricate reliefs.
Honestly, if you stripped away the crosses and didn't know it was in Russia, you would swear you were looking at a Greco-Roman pagan temple, or maybe the United States Capitol building.
Yeah, the resemblance is strong.
It had that exact same neoclassical Western authority aesthetic.
Which is precisely the foundation of the author's critique. The author argues that St. Isaac's was built specifically to emulate the Western European architectural trends of its time.
Right.
It was an exercise in aesthetic mimicking. Instead of expressing an authentic, localized Orthodox pursuit of divinity, it reads as a pseudo-worship of Western culture, history, and status.
It's the 19th century architectural equivalent of wearing the brand that everyone else says is cool, rather than wearing what actually represents your soul.
You want to look like Paris or Rome, so you build a building that looks like Paris or Rome.
Exactly.
And the author points out a deeply ironic but incredibly fitting reality about St. Isaac's today. Do you know what it's primarily used for now?
What is it?
It's a museum. Sure, there are some minor liturgical services held in a side chapel, but the main body of this massive building is essentially a museum.
Wow.
The author argues this is fitting because the building simply does not present itself as being oriented toward the worship of Christ. It was built as a monument to cultural aesthetics, not as a vessel for divine beauty, and so it naturally became a museum.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, both the main cathedral of the armed forces and St. Isaac's Cathedral suffered from the exact same fatal flaw, which is split priorities.
Right. St. Isaac's prioritized Western aesthetic emulation over divinity. The main cathedral prioritized patriotic, martial aesthetics, and national memory over divinity. Both buildings absolutely achieved their aesthetic goals, but because they divide their focus, both miss the transcendent mark of true beauty.
So what does a building that actually hits the mark look like? What does unadulterated beauty look like in stone?
That brings us to the author's ideal. Cathedral number 3, the Naval Cathedral of St. Nicholas in Kronstadt.
The visual contrast provided in the exhibit is just breathtaking. Unlike the dark, khaki, rigid metal of the Armed Forces Cathedral, the Naval Cathedral is a vision of bright white stone.
It's gorgeous.
It features massive, brilliantly shining silver and gold domes adorned with intricate, uplifting patterns. The architecture is deeply rooted in classical, authentic Orthodox design. It has soaring arches and a profound sense of lightness and elevation, despite its massive physical size. The author looks at this building and essentially says, yes, this is it. This is true beauty. They describe it as an expression of Orthodox universality. The author argues that this specific building actually carries a palpable divine grace.
Right.
And to explain how that happens, the text introduces a really compelling concept from systems theory. The author talks about an emergent property. Can you unpack how they are applying that scientific term to architecture?
It is a brilliant cross-disciplinary application. So in science, an emergent property is a property which a complex system possesses, but which the individual parts of that system do not have on their own.
Okay, can you give an example?
The classic example is salt. Salt is salty, but the sodium and chlorine that make it up are not salty individually.
Oh, right. Okay.
In this architectural context, the author is stating that when a church is constructed strictly and solely in accordance with the pursuit of divinity, when the primary, singular, undivided goal is to honor God, a unique, transcendent grace literally emerges from the stones, the glass, and the structure itself.
The building becomes more than the sum of its parts.
Exactly. The structure ceases to be just a pile of expensive stone and gold. It transforms into an active window to the divine.
Wow.
This emergent property of beauty is entirely absent in buildings that are constructed for divided, nationalistic, or secular aims, no matter how many billions of dollars are spent or how perfectly the aesthetic rules of proportion are followed.
So you can't buy the emergent property.
No, you can't. The author provides a very strict hierarchy here. A church must be created first to honor God and his children. If you flip that order or try to make the state and God equal partners in the design, you instantly lose the emergent property of beauty.
Right.
Now, the Naval Cathedral is a naval cathedral. It honors servicemen, but it didn't abandon divine beauty for secular martial aesthetics. It kept the hierarchy intact. God first.
Let me try to wrap my head around this emergent property idea with an analogy. Can a building be a masterpiece of design, perfectly fulfilling its architectural brief, and still be a spiritual failure?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm thinking about the film industry. We've all gone to the theater to see that spectacular summer blockbuster. It has a $250 million budget. The CGI special effects are flawless. The actors are impossibly attractive. The pacing has been scientifically calibrated by focus groups to ensure you never look at your watch.
The ultimate aesthetic experience.
Exactly. It perfectly fulfills its brief as a piece of aesthetic entertainment. But when the credits roll, you walk out to your car and you feel absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
It has no emotional heart. It completely lacks that emergent property of cinema that some tiny independent film shot on a shoestring budget might have in spades, simply because the indie film was passionately pursuing a transcendent human truth rather than just following an aesthetic formula for profit.
That analogy holds up perfectly, and it really illuminates the mechanism the author is describing. The blockbuster movie is the main cathedral of the armed forces. It is grand. It is imposing. It effectively utilizes all the modern tools and massive budgets to project strength and fulfill a specific cultural function. It entertains the national spirit, but it lacks the transcendent heart that leaves the observer in a state of genuine spiritual awe. It impresses the eye, but it does not save the soul.
Which begs a really painful, lingering question. Why? Why would a modern, incredibly grand project like the main cathedral of the armed forces, built with so much obvious passion, funding, and resources, fail to achieve that emergent property of true beauty?
Yeah.
And this leads us to the final major movement of the essay, where the author shifts from architectural critique into a deep and honestly quite melancholy sociological diagnosis of modern Russia. They call this the underlying wound.
This is where the essay becomes deeply introspective and historically aware. The author points out that the main cathedral is not universal in its spiritual language. It was built during a very specific historical window to accomplish the particular patriotic and spiritual needs of the modern Russian Federation.
Particular, meaning it's tied to the here and now. It's tied to current political borders, the current cultural zeitgeist, rather than the eternal universal truths of the faith that transcend borders.
Yes. And the author makes a very pointed, somewhat sorrowful observation about the state of contemporary Russian faith. They state that the orthodoxy of contemporary Russia has simply not yet returned to the authenticity and depth that could be found during the time of the Russian Empire.
Okay, but they add a caveat there, right?
Yes, the author is careful here. They add a footnote to clarify they aren't blindly romanticizing the past. They acknowledge there were innumerable issues regarding religious practice and corruption during the Tsar era. But speaking broadly, they argue there has been a massive loss of deep, authentic, transcendent faith across the culture.
And what caused that massive loss? The author points directly to the lingering generational wound of the 20th century, decades of state-enforced Soviet atheism. You had generations where the transcendent was systematically removed from daily life, where churches were destroyed or turned into swimming pools, where the vocabulary of the divine was erased.
It's tragic.
It is. The author drops a line that really stuck with me. For modern Russians, it is easier to be patriotic than it is to be genuinely orthodox.
It is a profound psychological and sociological insight. Think about the mechanics of cultural memory.
Okay.
When a culture has been systematically stripped of its spiritual vocabulary for nearly a century, it is incredibly difficult to just turn it back on overnight. Patriotism, national pride, the shared memory of immense military struggle. These are tangible worldly concepts that survived and were even heavily promoted during the Soviet era.
They're familiar.
They are accessible. They are known quantities. Therefore, when the modern Russian state decides to build a grand cathedral, it instinctively leans on the aesthetic language of patriotism, khaki green, and military strength, because that is the emotional language it currently speaks most fluently.
It's easier to build a monument to the state that is dressed up like a church than it is to build a true, vulnerable vessel for divine beauty.
Exactly. The author is very careful to frame this not as a hateful condemnation of the Russian people, but as a tragic acknowledgement of deep historical wounds. They are building what they know how to build.
So what does this all mean? Like, what does this mean for the author and by extension for us looking at this massive khaki building?
Oh.
The author actually does something incredibly vulnerable at the very end of the essay. After spending pages deconstructing why the main cathedral is a spiritual failure, they admit to having a personal affection for it.
They do, yeah.
They confess that they actually love its cold Soviet solemnity. But they recognize that this love is essentially a love for an imperfect good.
This is the tragedy of the essay's conclusion. The author looks at this magnificent, imposing building and realizes that it is yearning to be enlivened. It is a spectacular body without a soul. It was not built to be a conduit of divine grace. Its primary function is memory and solemnity. It is an aesthetic monument to survival, not a beautiful monument to eternity.
And then the author turns the mirror on themselves and invites the reader to do the same. They write, "For those who are enamored by such a work, people such as myself, maybe we are not yet spiritually attuned to grasp for that which remains beyond our reach, even as we know it is something we should be striving towards."
It is a devastating moment of self-reflection. The author is suggesting a difficult truth. If we find ourselves satisfied by or even enamored with this cold solemnity, this purely aesthetic display of power and aesthetics, it is a symptom of our own internal spiritual deadness.
Right.
We accept the aesthetic substitute because we have lost the spiritual noetic temperament required to recognize, demand, and create true transcendent beauty. The building is not just a failure of architecture, it is an accurate, multi-million-dollar architectural diagnostic of the modern soul.
The building is literally a mirror. It perfectly reflects the current cultural state, a complex blend of military pride, deep historical trauma, and a recovering, still fragile faith, rather than serving as a clear, unobstructed window to the divine. It is exactly the building you would expect a wounded culture to construct.
It brings us full circle back to the warning at the very beginning of the essay. The pursuit and veneration of aesthetics alone is detrimental.
Yeah.
When we settle for aesthetics, whether that is in the luxury fashion we wear, the purely physical attractiveness we chase in relationships, or the grand architecture we fund, we are merely settling for a reflection of our current flawed earthly selves, rather than striving for the transcendent reality of the divine.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today, and I want to turn this directly to you listening right now. We spent the last hour talking about grand Russian cathedrals, $1,000 counterfeit monastic hoodies, and ancient kings.
A lot of ground covered.
A ton. But the core question of this essay applies to the micro decisions you make every single day. Take a hard look around your life. How much of your daily existence is driven by that endless, exhausting treadmill of aesthetic novelty?
That's a tough question.
Are you chasing the next hot trend, constantly curating the perfect aesthetic brand for your online persona, or buying the next striking visual object for your home, only to feel completely indifferent to it a month later?
As a final synthesis of all the sources we've explored today, I think it is vital to reiterate the author's nuanced position. Aesthetics are not the enemy. The desire to make things visually appealing is a natural, beautiful human trait.
Okay.
The danger is when aesthetics become the final destination. The goal is to ensure that the subjective principles we use to design our lives, our clothing, our homes, our relationships, our civic spaces, are not just hollow branding. We must ensure they are actually anchored to and pointing toward something true, authentic, and transcendent. It's about seeking deep contentment over constant infatuation. It's about demanding that the things we build and the lives we curate actually have a soul. And I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
Okay.
Think about the physical world we are constructing right now, today. If our clothing, our digital spaces, and our city skylines act as an aesthetic mirror to our current spiritual state, and let's say 1,000 years from now, future archaeologists dig up our modern world, based purely on this metric, looking at the endless sea of functional, aesthetically pleasing, but entirely disposable things we surround ourselves with, what kind of soul will they think we possessed?
Will they see a culture that endlessly chased the temporary illusion of attractiveness, or one that was anchored in the enduring pursuit of true beauty?
Because right now, looking at the diagnostic muddy waters of our modern aesthetic landscape, it's hard to tell if we are building windows to the divine, or just more elaborate, expensive mirrors to stare at ourselves. Until next time, keep looking past the surface.